Well, I'd like to probably make a couple of videos about section 7 of Landsberg's The Experience of Death, which begins on page 212. This is a very valuable section of the essay. One of the reasons is that here he comments on two of our major figures in this course, Plato and Epicurus. And that's a very valuable thing. And I think that it's done a lot of work for us in the sense that he has given us a basis for just distinguishing himself, of course, from Epicurus. I mean, he distinguishes himself from Epicurus in the very title of the work, as is obvious, right? I mean, Landsberg, if Landsberg thinks there is an experience of death, which is something that Epicurus absolutely rules out, then he is not an Epicurean. But in a very fascinating way, he explains why he's not a Platonist, and thereby distinguishes for us, we inquirers into the nature of death, distinguishes for us the Platonic from the Christian view of death, which is quite amazing thing. Let's see how he begins this section, section 7, the forms of experience of death. The general outline of the attitude of the human person towards the problem of death, as we have tried to define it, shows that the sense of our mortality, which derives from the experience of death, naturally acquires a very different meaning according to the manner in which we formulate the dependence or independence of personal life on bodily life, which is a crucial issue. I think if we're going to be really, get to the heart of things in terms of a philosophy of death, which is just basically trying to ask very fundamental questions about death, that Landsberg is circling around this question. He's already raised it. He's already, in a certain sense, given us a kind of suggestion for a solution to the problem. But he is continually returning to it, and that is, in the last part of it, the manner in which we formulate the dependence or independence of personal life on bodily life. I mean, it's all there. If we completely insist, as modern scientific materialists, let's put it that way, that personal life is absolutely dependent on bodily life, then death is the end, and Epicurus was right. If, however, we have reason to believe that personal life can be independent of bodily life, then we have reason to believe in life after death, like Plato did, right? And so far, Landsberg and Plato are on the same page. But as we'll see, Landsberg will distinguish himself from Plato. We'll see. And maybe I'll do this in a more sort of scattershot way and jump ahead to something that he says about Plato. Since I've raised the issue, we might as well follow it up. It is on page 215 in this section. Just following, we'll have to backtrack a little bit, but what is Landsberg's view of Plato's conception of the immortality of the soul? If you look on page 215, the second paragraph, he talks about Plato's limitations. And about the middle of this paragraph, he says of Plato, his limitations are the limitations of all pre-Christian philosophy in Europe. The person was not yet disclosed, and the sense of death remained hidden. Man was still in process of discovering the spiritual world of philosophic thought. He had become aware of abstract concepts, but he had not yet become aware of himself as person, through the spontaneous manifestation of the person as the eternal primordial existence of the spirit. That's pretty amazing stuff there, I have to say. It doesn't really matter if you are yourself a Christian or you're just interested in Christianity or interested in the development of the human species, and you don't have to agree with it, but you should see what the claim is there on the part of the Christian philosopher Landsberg. Basically, what he's saying is that I think that Plato couldn't help but get it wrong about death, because everyone before Christ got it wrong about death. And the reason they got it wrong is it wasn't until the emergence of Christianity that the human species began, or human beings individually began to understand themselves as persons. And that again, the notion of the person is the central notion in Landsberg. Should be clear from the discussion of section 5. So Plato couldn't help but get it wrong. And that is an historical, and that's for historical reasons, because Christianity was what revealed human beings to themselves as individual persons. And as we've seen, that realization of oneself as a person is also necessary for seeing death clearly. And so Plato couldn't help but get it wrong. But it would probably be good to fill that in a little bit. I mean, what was Plato's view of immortality and death, and why does Landsberg think that, in a more concrete or specific way, or reasons, why does he think that Plato misconceived immortality? Well, if we look at his discussion of Plato, here really beginning on page 213, when he says, ever since Plato, the philosophers of the spirit have followed this path in order to justify by argument the hope of survival, or survival of the person through death. And that, in a sense, is what was going on in the Phaedo, is a conception of survival, conception of the survival of the soul after death. And he has a lot to say about the source of it and the truth, however partial of it. But if you look at, this is on page 214 in the last paragraph here. Let's read the whole thing to put it in context. It says, let us return for a moment to the experience of anguish. And anguish is the experience, Landsberg's characterization of the experience of us thinking about our death as annihilating us, death as nothingness, the Epicurean view, or his version of the Epicurean view. Let's return for a moment to the experience of anguish. The quasi-inexistence of the spirit of the dead man was due to the fact that the spirit lacked any basis for being present once it was derived of body and isolated from the world of the living. The expatriated spirit was a nice expression there. You know, to be expatriated is to be expelled from your country, and one may characterize death is the expatriation of the spirit from the body, the country of the body. The expatriated spirit assumed the nature of a specter, of a ghost. He's talking about really the pre-Platonic Greek view of the afterlife, which is you're a shade, you're a ghost, you're a specter, you're a sort of leftover kind of see-through spiritual specter ghost version of yourself, and you are. It's not a very fulfilling life. I mean, if you look in Homer, when Odysseus does Odysseus go down to Hades and talk to Achilles down there, and Achilles says, "This is horrible here. I'd rather be the worst person in the world, the lowest person in the world, than to be the king down here, because everybody's just a kind of a gibbering idiot of themselves." That was the kind of the Greek pre-classical philosophy view of the afterlife. Maybe it was the entire view of the afterlife. I don't know. The expatriated spirit assumed the nature of a specter, of something with an existence not entirely to be denied, but which seems somehow to be lacking. Right? It's thin, it's insubstantial, since it doesn't admit the idea of the possibility of a true presence. Spirit can only exist in community. That's his Christianity there, right? It's an important part of it we'll have to bring out. If we wish to conceive of an autonomy of the spirit sufficiently powerful to reach beyond death, we must needs believe that the spirit is not isolated at death, but at least introduced into another world. This is, again, his Christianity, that the life and community and love are really the same thing. Isolation is not compatible with the inner structure of personal existence and implies the tendency to annihilation. So the threat and menace of death is really the threat and menace of isolation, of the wrenching of the individual out of the community and put into kind of a loneliness. Thus, the specter, the ghost, remains in a dubious relationship to the world to which it no longer belongs. Thus, the Platonic attitude to death is only possible if one admits the ontology of ideas. That's Plato's other world, is what Landsberg is suggesting. And what he's suggesting, relying, I think, on what we've read, the Phaedo, is that the world that the philosopher enters into after death is the world of the forms, the world of the ideas, the world of truth. And it is that world that Plato is imagining. But this also introduces us to the essential limitations of Platonism. The spiritual world with which the spirit of the dead man will now coexist, in which it will participate by taking on the form of existence proper to this new world, is still only a world of ideas. Is the person itself to become an idea? This spirit person would then be a transitory and secondary form of the spirit, which in its own essence would be idea. Here we are confronted with an antinomy, a problem, a logical contradiction. For man's survival must be personal, if it is to be the survival that his hope leads him to seek, the soul's survival worthy of the name. And here we really get to Landsberg's statement about Plato's limitations. Plato imagined an afterlife in which you kind of become absorbed into the truth of the ideas, in which Landsberg said, well, do you yourself become an idea? And what he's pointing out is that this is not the content of what he called hope in section 5, because that hope is not for me to somehow merge with the ideas, the forms, the truth. The hope is that the I that I know as a personality, that survives. That's why he says man's survival must be personal, if it is to be the survival that his hope leads him to seek, the soul survival worthy of the name. Plato's conception of the afterlife was really a kind of a generic conception of immortality, almost like he's saying that part of me that can't die, the immortal soul, it survives. Whereas Landsberg is saying that the content of the hope that he's talking about is not that some deathless part of me survives, but that I, the person, the unique person that I am, that I survive death, that the afterlife is an afterlife of me as an individual, the individual person that I am, and not simply some generic sort of thing, which is, frankly, what Krishna, I think, says to Arjuna, that the survival of the self is completely not your individual personality. But what Landsberg is saying is that that's got to be what it is, because that's the only survival that we really hope for. And this criticism of Plato is really quite brilliant. I don't know that there is nothing that the it's just a different view, and it's a Christian criticism, and it is an argument in itself for the Christian over the Platonic view of the afterlife.